She can't remember her own name, but when 78-year-old Margaret Phillips heard the opening notes of Love Me Tender at Elvis's Las Vegas concert, something miraculous happened. The woman who hadn't spoken a coherent sentence in 6 months suddenly stood up, walked through the crowd of 15,000 people, and sat down at the piano on stage. What happened next defied everything doctors know about Alzheimer's disease. Margaret Phillips wasn't just any elderly woman struggling with dementia. She was a former concert pianist who had performed at Carnegie Hall, and her muscle memory was about to prove that music lives in a part of the brain that Alzheimer's cannot touch. But to understand why this moment would rewrite medical textbooks and bring Elvis Presley to tears, you need to know about the letter Margaret's husband had hidden from her for 2 years, a letter from her neurologist that said her case was hopeless. It was September 23, 1975, at the International Hotel in Las Vegas. Elvis was performing his evening show to a sold-out crowd, the intimate venue filled with 2,200 devoted fans. The atmosphere was electric as Elvis moved through his set list, having just finished an energetic version of Burning Love and transitioning into the gentler portion of his performance. In the front row center section sat Richard Phillips with his wife Margaret. To anyone watching, they looked like any other elderly couple enjoying an evening of entertainment. But Richard was living through a nightmare that had been unfolding for the past 2.5 years, ever since Margaret had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease at the age of 75. The woman sitting beside him bore little resemblance to the vibrant, articulate concert pianist he had married 53 years earlier. Margaret Phillips had once commanded standing ovations at Carnegie Hall, had performed private concerts for 3 different presidents, and had taught piano to some of the most promising young musicians in America. Her technical brilliance and emotional interpretation had earned her recognition as one of the finest classical pianists of her generation. But Alzheimer's disease doesn't care about talent, achievement, or legacy. It had systematically dismantled Margaret's mind, stealing her memories one precious moment at a time. First, she had forgotten recent conversations, then the names of distant relatives, then how to operate simple household appliances. By the time Richard brought her to Elvis's concert that September evening, Margaret could no longer remember the names of her own children, couldn't recognize her reflection in the mirror, and hadn't spoken a complete sentence in 8 months. The decision to attend the concert had been Richard's desperate attempt to reach whatever remained of his wife's consciousness. Margaret had always loved music, and during her gradual decline, melodies seemed to be one of the few things that could still capture her attention, if only briefly. Richard had noticed that when he played classical recordings in their living room, Margaret would sometimes hum along, or her fingers would move as if she were playing invisible keys. Their own piano had been silent for over 2 years. The beautiful Steinway grand that had been the centerpiece of their music room now sat covered with a white sheet, its keys untouched since the day Margaret had sat down to practice and couldn't remember what the black and white keys were for. Richard had found her that morning, sitting at the bench with tears streaming down her face, her hands hovering over the keyboard, searching for something her damaged brain could no longer provide. Dr. Harrison Chen, Margaret's neurologist at the University of Nevada Medical Center, had been brutally honest about her prognosis. "The progression is aggressive," he had told Richard during their last consultation. "We're seeing significant deterioration in the areas of the brain responsible for language, memory formation, and executive function. I have to prepare you for the reality that Margaret may have at most 6 to 12 months before she requires full-time care." The letter Dr. Chen had written to the family, dated 2 months earlier, had been even more direct. Richard had hidden it in his desk drawer, unable to bear the thought of Margaret somehow understanding its contents during one of her rare moments of clarity. The letter stated that Margaret's case was among the most rapidly progressing he had seen, and that conventional treatments had shown no measurable effect on slowing her cognitive decline. But Richard refused to give up hope. He had researched every experimental treatment, consulted with specialists across the country, and tried various forms of music therapy. Some approaches showed minimal temporary improvement. Playing familiar songs from her childhood occasionally brought moments of recognition, Classical pieces she had performed professionally sometimes caused her to move her hands in playing motions, but these episodes were brief, lasting only minutes before she would retreat back into the fog of confusion. Tonight's concert represented what Richard feared might be his last attempt to connect with the woman he loved. Elvis Presley had always been one of Margaret's favorite contemporary performers, despite her classical training. She had often told Richard that Elvis possessed a natural musicality that transcended genre, and she admired his ability to convey emotion through melody in ways that touched people's hearts directly. As Elvis began the opening chords of Love Me Tender, Richard noticed something change in Margaret's posture. For the first time in months, she was sitting completely still, her head tilted slightly as if she were listening intently to something far away. Her eyes, which had been vacant and unfocused for most of the evening, suddenly seemed to clear with a sharpness that Richard hadn't seen in over a year. "Love me tender, love me sweet, never let me go," Elvis sang, his voice carrying across the intimate venue with that characteristic gentle power that had made the song a classic. The melody was simple, accessible, the kind of tune that embedded itself in memory and stayed there for decades. Margaret's reaction was immediate and startling. Her right hand began to move in subtle patterns, her fingers pressing against her thigh as if she were playing piano keys. The movements were precise, deliberate, following the exact rhythm and chord progressions of the song. Richard watched in amazement as his wife's muscle memory awakened, her hands beginning to play the accompaniment to Elvis's performance. But what happened next left Richard speechless. Margaret slowly stood up from her seat, her movements more fluid and purposeful than they had been in months. Without saying a word, without any apparent awareness of the 2,200 people around her, she began walking toward the stage. Her gait was steady, determined, as if she were responding to an invisible summons that only she could hear. Security guards immediately moved to intercept her, assuming she was another overzealous fan trying to get closer to the performer. But Elvis, with his legendary ability to read an audience, noticed something different about this elderly woman's approach. There was no hysteria in her movement, no desperate reaching or calling out. Instead, there was a quiet dignity, a sense of purpose that made him pause mid-verse. "Hold on there, friends," Elvis said into the microphone, his voice stopping the security team in their tracks. "Let the lady come through." He had learned to trust his instincts about people, and something in Margaret's demeanor told him this was not a typical fan encounter. Margaret walked past the security barrier as if it didn't exist, her eyes fixed on the piano that sat at the side of the stage. Elvis used the same Steinway grand for his more intimate numbers, and as Margaret approached it, her face showed the first clear expression of recognition Richard had seen in months. "Ma'am," Elvis said gently, stepping away from the main microphone and approaching Margaret. "What's your name, darling?" But Margaret didn't respond to his words. Instead, she sat down at the piano bench with the familiarity of someone who had done so thousands of times before. Richard, who had been frozen in shock, suddenly found his voice. "Her name is Margaret Phillips," he called out from his seat. She has Alzheimer's disease, but she used to be a concert pianist. She performed at Carnegie Hall." The venue fell completely silent. 2,200 people held their breath as they realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Elvis knelt down beside the piano bench, speaking quietly to Margaret. "You want to play something with me, Margaret? Would you like that?" Margaret's response wasn't verbal. Instead, she placed her hands on the keyboard and began to play. What emerged was a piano arrangement of Love Me Tender so sophisticated, so emotionally nuanced, that it transformed Elvis's simple melody into something approaching classical artistry. Her fingers moved with the precision and confidence of someone who had spent decades mastering their craft. The arrangement was extraordinary. Margaret was playing in a classical style that somehow enhanced rather than competed with Elvis's vocal approach. She added harmonies that no one in the audience had ever heard before, her left hand providing a bass line that gave the familiar song an entirely new dimension. Her right hand danced across the higher registers, creating melodic counterpoints that seemed to have a conversation with Elvis's voice. Elvis, recognizing that he was in the presence of true musical genius, adapted his singing to complement her playing. He had always been a generous performer, someone who elevated those around him, and this moment was no exception. He began to sing with a tenderness and restraint that allowed Margaret's piano work to shine, creating a duet between voice and instrument that was both intimate and magnificent. For 4 minutes and 17 seconds, Margaret Phillips was completely present. Her Alzheimer's symptoms seemed to disappear entirely as her muscle memory took control. She played with expression, with dynamics, with the kind of musical intelligence that can only come from years of professional training and natural talent. Her face, which had been blank and confused for months, now showed concentration, joy, and the deep satisfaction of a musician fully engaged with their art. Dr. Patricia Williams, a neurologist who happened to be in the audience that night, would later describe what she witnessed as one of the most remarkable examples of preserved musical memory she had ever seen. Alzheimer's disease typically affects different regions of the brain at different rates, she explained in her subsequent research paper. Musical memory, particularly procedural memory related to playing instruments, is often preserved longer than other cognitive functions because it involves different neural pathways. But what made Margaret's performance truly extraordinary was not just the preservation of her technical skills, but the emotional expression that accompanied them. This wasn't mechanical repetition of memorized patterns. This was active, creative musical interpretation happening in real time. She was responding to Elvis's phrasing, adapting her playing to complement his vocal choices, engaging in the kind of musical dialogue that requires not just memory but active listening and creative response. The audience was transfixed. Many people were openly weeping, moved not just by the beauty of the music, but by the profound human drama unfolding before them. Here was a woman who couldn't remember her own name creating something beautiful and meaningful, proving that the essence of who we are can survive even when so much else is lost. Elvis himself was visibly emotional. As someone who had always believed in the transformative power of music, he was witnessing a miracle that validated everything he had ever felt about melody's ability to reach places that words cannot touch. When the song ended, he remained kneeling beside the piano bench, his hand gently placed on Margaret's shoulder. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said into the microphone, his voice thick with emotion, "you have just witnessed something truly special. This is Mrs. Margaret Phillips, and she has just reminded all of us why music is the most powerful force in the world." The standing ovation lasted for over 3 minutes, but Margaret seemed unaware of the applause. As soon as the music ended, the clarity began to fade from her eyes. She looked around the stage with confusion, as if waking from a vivid dream and finding herself in an unfamiliar place. "Richard," she said, speaking her first clear word in 8 months. "Where are we? How did I get here?" Richard had rushed onto the stage during the ovation, and he was there to take her hand as the fog of Alzheimer's settled back over her consciousness. "We're at a concert, sweetheart," he said gently. "You just played the most beautiful music anyone has ever heard." Elvis spent several more minutes with Margaret and Richard, learning about her background and the progression of her disease. He was fascinated by what had just occurred, asking thoughtful questions about her musical training and her current condition. When Richard mentioned that Margaret no longer played at home, that their piano had been silent for over 2 years, Elvis made a decision that would impact the rest of their lives. "Richard," Elvis said quietly, "I want you to know that what happened here tonight wasn't just beautiful music, it was proof that Margaret is still there, that the artist in her is still alive. Promise me you'll uncover that piano when you get home. Promise me you'll play music for her every day." But Elvis didn't stop there. Moved by what he had witnessed, he arranged for Margaret to receive ongoing music therapy sessions at the hospital where Dr. Chen practiced. He also ensured that a professional-grade keyboard was installed in the Phillips home, along with recordings of classical music that might trigger similar moments of clarity. The impact of that September evening extended far beyond one remarkable performance. Dr. Williams used Margaret's case as the foundation for groundbreaking research into the relationship between musical memory and Alzheimer's disease. Her work led to the development of new therapeutic approaches that are now used in treatment centers around the world. Margaret's condition continued to progress, as Dr. Chen had predicted, but the musical interventions that resulted from her encounter with Elvis provided her with periods of clarity and joy that might not have been possible otherwise. Richard reported that playing familiar melodies could sometimes bring her back, if only briefly, allowing them to share moments of connection that had seemed lost forever. More importantly, Margaret's story became a source of hope for thousands of families dealing with Alzheimer's disease. The bootleg recordings of her performance with Elvis circulated among medical professionals and were eventually used in training programs for music therapists. Her case demonstrated that even in the face of devastating neurological disease, the human capacity for beauty and expression could endure. Richard Phillips kept his promise to Elvis. He uncovered their Steinway grand piano and began playing for Margaret every day. While she never again achieved the level of clarity and skill she had shown that night in Las Vegas, there were moments, precious, fleeting moments, when the music would reach her, and her fingers would remember what they had once known how to do. Elvis continued to follow Margaret's case until his own death in 1977. He would call Richard periodically to check on her progress and to ask about her response to different musical interventions. These conversations revealed a side of Elvis that the public rarely saw: his genuine compassion for individual human suffering and his deep belief in music's healing power. In her final years, Margaret Phillips became a symbol of resilience and the enduring nature of artistic expression. Even as Alzheimer's stripped away so much of who she had been, her brief return to musical brilliance that September night proved that some essential part of her remained untouchable. The woman who couldn't remember her own name had reminded the world that music lives in a place deeper than memory, in the very soul of human experience. The story of Margaret Phillips and her miraculous piano performance with Elvis Presley continues to inspire musicians, medical professionals, and families affected by Alzheimer's disease. It serves as a reminder that even in our darkest moments, when disease threatens to steal everything we hold dear, the power of music can still reach us, still connect us to who we truly are, and still create beauty that touches the hearts of all who witness it. Today, more than 45 years later, music therapy programs around the world use Margaret's story as an example of the incredible potential that exists within every person, regardless of their cognitive limitations. Her 4 minutes and 17 seconds on stage with Elvis proved that Alzheimer's may steal memories, but it cannot steal the soul, and sometimes when the music is just right, the soul remembers how to sing. The Margaret Phillips Foundation, established by Richard after her death in 1983, continues to fund research into musical interventions for Alzheimer's patients. The foundation has provided grants for over 200 research projects, leading to breakthrough discoveries about how music affects the brain and how it can be used therapeutically for patients with various forms of dementia. Dr. Chen, Margaret's original neurologist, became one of the leading advocates for incorporating music therapy into standard Alzheimer's treatment protocols. In his 1985 research paper, Musical Memory Preservation in Advanced Alzheimer's Disease, the Phillips Case Study, he wrote, "What we witnessed that evening in Las Vegas challenged every assumption we had about the progression of Alzheimer's disease. Margaret Phillips showed us that even in the most advanced stages of cognitive decline, islands of preserved function can exist, waiting for the right stimulus to activate them." The case became required reading in medical schools across the United States and Europe. Neurologists studying the disease began to understand that musical memory operates through different neural pathways than other forms of memory, pathways that can remain intact even when other cognitive functions have severely deteriorated. This discovery led to the development of specialized music therapy programs that are now standard in many memory care facilities. Richard Phillips lived until 1992, spending his final years as a vocal advocate for Alzheimer's research and music therapy. He kept detailed journals of Margaret's responses to different musical interventions, documentation that proved invaluable to researchers studying the relationship between music and memory. His observations helped identify which types of musical stimuli were most effective in reaching patients with advanced dementia. Margaret taught us that love and music exist in the same place in the human heart, Richard wrote in his final journal entry. Alzheimer's can take away words, faces, even the recognition of our own names, but it cannot touch the place where music lives. In that place we remain ourselves forever. The piano bench where Margaret sat that September evening is now part of a permanent exhibit at the Country Music Hall of Fame in Nashville. The exhibit, titled "When Music Heals," tells the story of her performance with Elvis and its impact on our understanding of music's therapeutic potential. Visitors often report being moved to tears as they listen to the bootleg recording of her performance, hearing the voice of a woman who had lost the ability to speak, combining with the piano playing of someone whose technical skills had supposedly been destroyed by disease. Elvis's role in Margaret's story extends beyond that single evening. His decision to fund ongoing research into musical interventions for Alzheimer's patients contributed to advances that have helped thousands of families. The Elvis Presley Foundation continues to support music therapy programs, ensuring that his belief in music's healing power lives on through practical applications that change people's lives. The recording of Margaret's performance has been analyzed by musicologists who marvel at the sophistication of her improvised arrangement. Professor Sarah Martinez of the Juilliard School wrote, "What Mrs. Phillips created in those 4 minutes was not just a piano accompaniment. It was a complete reharmonization of Elvis's melody that demonstrated active, creative musical thinking at the highest level." The fact that she accomplished this while suffering from advanced Alzheimer's disease challenges everything we thought we knew about the relationship between cognition and musical ability. Modern neuroscience has begun to explain what happened to Margaret that evening. Advanced brain imaging techniques have shown that musical processing involves multiple regions of the brain working in coordination, and that some of these regions can maintain their function even when other areas are severely damaged by disease. The phenomenon Margaret experienced, the sudden return of complex musical abilities, is now recognized as a legitimate neurological event that can occur in patients with various forms of dementia. Music therapy protocols developed from studying Margaret's case are now used in over 3,000 care facilities worldwide. The Phillips method involves exposing patients to music from their personal past, particularly pieces they once performed or that held special emotional significance. The results have been remarkable. Patients who haven't spoken in months sometimes begin singing along to familiar songs, and some even regain temporary periods of clarity during musical sessions. The implications extend beyond Alzheimer's treatment. Margaret's case has influenced research into other neurological conditions, including stroke recovery, traumatic brain injury rehabilitation, and even autism therapy. The understanding that musical memory can serve as a bridge to other cognitive functions has opened new avenues for treatment that combine traditional medical approaches with artistic interventions. Richard's promise to Elvis to uncover their piano and play music for Margaret every day proved to be more than just a gesture of hope. The daily musical sessions provided Margaret with moments of connection and joy that significantly improved her quality of life in her final years. These sessions also provided researchers with valuable data about how consistent musical exposure affects the progression of Alzheimer's symptoms. The story of Margaret Phillips reminds us that even in the face of devastating illness, the human capacity for beauty, creativity, and connection endures. Her brief return to musical brilliance that September evening proved that Alzheimer's disease, for all its cruelty, cannot destroy the essential core of who we are. In the place where music lives, that sacred space in the human soul, we remain forever ourselves, forever capable of creating something beautiful, forever able to touch the hearts of those who witness our truest expression. Margaret Phillips couldn't remember her own name, but she remembered how to make the world more beautiful through music. In doing so, she gave hope to millions of families facing similar struggles, and proved that love, art, and the human spirit are stronger than any disease. Her legacy lives on not just in the medical advances her case inspired, but in every moment when music reaches across the darkness of illness to remind us of the light that still shines within. The technical aspects of Margaret's performance continue to fascinate musicians and researchers alike. Analysis of the bootleg recording reveals that she instinctively transposed Elvis's melody into a key better suited for piano, adjusting the harmonies to create a richer, more complex musical texture. Her left hand maintained a steady bass line that provided rhythmic foundation, while her right hand wove intricate melodic variations around Elvis's vocal line. This level of real-time musical arrangement requires not just technical skill, but deep understanding of harmonic relationships and melodic development, cognitive processes that should have been impossible given her condition. The September 23 performance also highlighted the social aspects of musical healing. The 2,200 people in the audience became involuntary participants in a therapeutic experience, their collective emotional response creating an atmosphere of support and acceptance that may have contributed to Margaret's remarkable clarity. This observation led to the development of group music therapy approaches that harness the power of shared musical experience to enhance individual healing. Contemporary neuroscientists studying Margaret's case have identified what they call musical islands, preserved areas of cognitive function that remain accessible through musical stimulation, even when other mental faculties have been severely compromised. Dr. Michael Rodriguez, director of the National Institute for Music and Neurological Health, explains Margaret Phillips represents a turning point in our understanding of how the brain processes music. Her case proved that musical memory isn't just preserved in Alzheimer's patients, it can serve as a gateway to accessing other cognitive abilities that appear to be lost. The emotional impact of Margaret's story extends far beyond the medical community. Hundreds of families have shared their own experiences of loved ones with dementia suddenly returning during musical moments. These accounts, collected by the Margaret Phillips Foundation, form a growing body of evidence that music therapy can provide not just temporary relief from symptoms but genuine moments of connection and humanity that enrich the lives of both patients and their families. One particularly moving account comes from Sarah Mitchell, whose mother developed early-onset Alzheimer's at age 62. After reading about Margaret Phillips, we started playing my mother's favorite songs from her youth, Sarah wrote. One day, during Blue Moon, she suddenly looked at me with complete recognition and said, "Sarah, my beautiful daughter." It was the first time she'd recognized me in 8 months. That moment gave our whole family hope. The Phillips method has been adapted for different stages of Alzheimer's progression. In early stages, patients often respond well to complex classical pieces or songs with personal significance. As the disease progresses, simpler melodies and familiar children's songs become more effective. In advanced stages, even basic rhythmic patterns can sometimes elicit responses, providing comfort and connection when verbal communication is no longer possible. Elvis's personal involvement in Margaret's ongoing care revealed aspects of his character that the public rarely saw. He not only funded her music therapy sessions, but also arranged for professional musicians to visit her regularly, understanding that live music often had more impact than recordings. His staff reported that he would ask about Margaret's progress during his concert tours, and he specifically requested updates after each therapy session. The therapeutic approach developed from Margaret's case emphasizes the importance of personalizing musical interventions. Research has shown that songs from a person's adolescence and early adulthood, roughly ages 10 to 25, are most likely to trigger strong emotional and cognitive responses. This reminiscence bump period represents a time when the brain is forming lasting memories, and when music often plays a significant role in identity development. Margaret's husband Richard became an unexpected expert on Alzheimer's care through his daily musical sessions with his wife. His detailed observations helped researchers understand how different types of music affected Margaret's cognitive state. He noted that classical pieces she had performed professionally could sometimes restore her technical abilities for brief periods, while popular songs from their early marriage brought back emotional memories and personal recognition. The international impact of Margaret's story led to the establishment of similar music therapy programs in countries around the world. The Margaret Phillips International Music Therapy Institute, founded in 1988, has trained thousands of therapists and established treatment protocols that are now used in over 50 countries. The Institute's research has contributed to our understanding of how cultural differences in musical preferences affect the therapeutic value of different musical interventions. One of the most significant developments inspired by Margaret's case is the creation of personalized musical profiles for patients entering memory care facilities. These profiles, based on interviews with family members and analysis of the patient's musical history, guide therapists in selecting the most effective musical interventions. The approach has shown remarkable success in maintaining quality of life for patients and providing emotional support for families. The story of Margaret Phillips also illuminated the role that family members play in therapeutic success. Richard's unwavering commitment to finding ways to connect with his wife, his willingness to participate in experimental treatments, and his detailed documentation of her responses all contributed to the medical advances that emerged from her case. His example has inspired training programs that teach family members how to implement musical interventions at home. The continuing research into musical memory has revealed that the brain regions responsible for processing music are among the last to be affected by Alzheimer's disease. This discovery has led to early intervention strategies that use musical training to potentially slow cognitive decline in at-risk individuals. While still experimental, these approaches offer hope for preventing or delaying the onset of dementia symptoms. Margaret Phillips's 4 minutes and 17 seconds on stage with Elvis Presley represents more than just a remarkable medical anomaly. It represents a fundamental shift in how we understand the relationship between mind, memory, and music. Her story continues to inspire new research, new treatments, and new hope for millions of people whose lives have been touched by Alzheimer's disease. In proving that music lives in a place that disease cannot reach, Margaret Phillips gave the world a gift that continues to heal, comfort, and inspire more than 4 decades after that magical September evening in Las Vegas. The legacy of that night extends into the present day, where advanced technology now allows researchers to study the brain in ways that were impossible in 1975. Functional MRI scans of Alzheimer's patients listening to personally meaningful music show increased activity in memory-related brain regions, providing scientific validation for what Margaret Phillips demonstrated through her extraordinary performance. These studies have confirmed that music engages neural networks that remain functional even when other cognitive systems have failed. Today, virtual reality technology is being combined with musical therapy to create immersive experiences that transport patients back to meaningful moments in their lives. Inspired by Margaret's story, these programs use familiar songs as gateways to preserved memories, helping patients reconnect with their identities, and providing families with precious moments of recognition and connection. The Margaret Phillips Virtual Memory Project has already helped over 10,000 families worldwide create lasting musical memories with their loved ones. If Margaret Phillips could see the world today, she would be amazed to know that her 4 minutes and 17 seconds of music have echoed through decades, touching millions of lives and transforming our understanding of what it means to be human in the face of devastating illness. Her piano keys, silent for so long, spoke a language that transcended words, medical diagnoses, and even the cruel progression of disease itself, proving that in the deepest chambers of the human heart, music and love are eternal, waiting always for the right moment to remind us who we truly are.